Nice to meet you.
So where are you located?
Kansas City.
You're here in Kansas City.
Yep.
I didn't realize that. Wonderful. Yeah. It just doesn't happen that often that I talk to anybody from Kansas City. I'm kind of like, okay, that's cool.
Yeah,
So,
I've lived here since 2016.
okay, right on.
Yeah,
Well, we're
yeah.
going to peel back all the layers of everything that's going on.
Okay. Go.
So, where are you at in Kansas City exactly?
I'm up near the airport near Zona Rosa area.
I got you. Okay, right on.
Yeah. hmm Yeah.
Yeah, I'm at the I actually moved to the home of Pat Metheny in January 2020. So, out here in Lee Summit. But yeah,
Mhm.
well, cool, man. So I want to begin our conversation with what we lived through for the last 3.5 years or so with COVID. How did you get through the pandemic, and how did it change you?
COVID for me, I know it's kind of ironic, but it was great because I'm a sales rep for a guitar company.
Okay.
That's what I do to make a living. And I travel all the time. But when COVID hit, I was grounded, no more traveling. I was home and had time on my hands. So I began, composing and recording at home a lot. So it was really a nice time for me because I had all that extra time to devote to music. So I put together my first album called Rogers Park, which we released in January of this year. It was actually recorded, the previous year, but we had a producer out in LA, kind of a legendary bass player named Jimmy Haslip, and he produced that first record. And he was hard to sometimes nail down because he's a busy guy. So, and we got that album out in January, and yeah, so COVID enabled me to have that time and energy. So it was great.
I keep hearing there's so many silver linings. I mean, it doesn't take away from all the woe that we went through, and people that were lost. But I do find that I think at the end of the day, it's really about a lot of what we were before we went into this was only magnified. We had choices to make the best out of our time, and you just have to diversify when things like this happen. And no one, I don't remember. I've heard stories of people that went through the Spanish flu, but I didn't really talk to anybody that had anything to do with any level of pandemic, and how every single aspect of our lives were altered, and we just had to
Sure.
find a way through. So
Yep.
it
Yep.
was
Yep.
interesting. So let's get into your latest album, Spheres. And how does it feel to have new material out now? Does it feel relieving and good? How does this release feel?
Yeah, it feels great. I mean, I try to keep music flowing, compositions flowing. It's not always easy. Sometimes you're inspired, sometimes you're not. But yeah, it was really cool because Rogers Park was like the beginning of a certain kind of sound and kind of musical style that I was kind of working on. And I think Spheres is the next step. It's the evolution. So it kind of spread out a little more. I have a collaborator I work with who's in Los Angeles who plays drums, Marty Zevin, and he actually played on fewer tunes on Spheres. He played on about half of the tunes on the album. So I think it just was kind of a next evolution as far as where that style and that sound was going.
So what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
Well, it's definitely it's a fusion album, and I know some people think of fusion is like a dirty word. Purists think of it that way, but unfortunately, when I pick up a guitar or I compose, fusion music is what comes out. That's just what you know. I grew up in that era. My musical identity, all my heroes, all kind of came from that era. So if anything, I just want people to hear it and to really, have their ears opened, to maybe a different kind of fusiony sound. A lot of people think of, fusion as what they hear on watercolors on XM, which, I can't listen to myself, personally. I find it to be just, too watered down and just not, lacking in kind of originality and energy. So I think, the stuff on Spheres is got a lot of energy, and I think it's maybe a different take on what I would call fusion music.
So how did this journey into the jazz and music begin for you? Tell me where you were born and raised and how it all started.
Sure. I grew up in Chicago. I played guitar since I was a little kid. And, I grew up into the music of, blues and rock, because that's what was all around you in Chicago growing up. And of course, Jimi Hendrix was my idol as a kid. You wanted to play like him. You never could, of course, but, that was what I was into doing. And, was happy in that music until one day a friend of mine played me a John McLaughlin album. He actually played me the first Mahavishnu album, and I was totally floored. I was just knocked down. It's like, what is this? Who is this? No idea what it was about, and I just was infatuated and fell in love. So I then went to a record store. Okay, remember when there were record stores?
Yes.
Went to and looked in, John McLaughlin's, record bin. And I began to see that he played on albums by guys like Miles Davis and Tony Williams. And who are these guys? And Miles Davis, okay, who's playing on this record? Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea. So that's kind of how I got into jazz, was through John McLaughlin and his music, leading me into all the different places he played, which led me into all the other musicians. And of course, I have a love for really all jazz. I mean, I love everything from, Freddie Hubbard and John Coltrane, Dexter Gordon. I go back and, enjoy that stuff. But as a guitar player, it's kind of funny because the guitar was not really a featured instrument in the 50s very much. You had a couple of guys, but not as much as the horn players and, woodwind players. So I mean, I listened a little bit to, some of the kind of mainstream jazz guitar players, but that was really not really my thing. It was more the kind of the fusion-y thing. But yeah, so that's how I got into it.
I'm always surprised at how good Les Paul was at the whole jazz game. I remember those early recordings. They were really good.
Yeah, he was a great player. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of. I find that the average guitar player in 2023, I don't care what it is. It could be country music, whatever kind of style it is, but their technique has improved and evolved over the average guitar player from maybe the 60s or the 70s. And I think it has to do on the fusion thing. I think that kind of fueled the expertise of guitar players.
Yeah, for sure. So what was the first live show that you saw that blew you away?
Well, the first live show I ever saw was actually Alice Cooper.
Right on.
And it blew me away because he was hung from a scaffold in the show. That was part of the stage show. So that kind of blew me away. I was a kid. I was probably, 14. Musically, it didn't really blow me away, although the opening act was quite interesting. It was actually Dr. John. And
Wow.
But it was when he first came out and he was doing a very commercial thing where he had on this, like a voodoo headdress and like a voodoo priest kind of guy. I mean, it was not about his piano playing or any of that. It was more like a show, thing. But I remember seeing that and go, wow, this guy's really cool, pretty interesting kind of music. So that was my first concert that I ever saw.
It's
Yeah.
interesting. I think about that kind of a thing. Back in the 90s, I went to see a band called Candlebox, and the Flaming Lips opened up for them. And the Flaming Lips at that time, it was I'd never seen anything like that. I mean, there was lights and pinwheels and all this stuff going on. And
Yeah.
I'm a fan of their music, but the show they put on in the 90s, it was just it was crazy. And it's weird how sometimes those opening acts really do go in, hopefully ringing a bell and cementing an image. And obviously Dr. John did that for you.
Yeah. Well, speaking of opening acts, so I saw the Mahavishnu Orchestra in Chicago at a place called the Aragon Ballroom, and it was, it was crazy. But in those days, fusion bands could sell out rock arenas,
Yeah.
10,000, 20,000 seat places. Saw Weather Report, many times in Chicago in huge venues. But anyway, the opening act at the Mahavishnu concert was Aerosmith.
Wow.
It
I'm not
was like,
surprised.
who are these guys? It's like, we don't want to see them. Bring on John McLaughlin. No, but it was just kind of interesting that. But yeah, it was amazing how many, large out format shows, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, could sell out, and it's just kind of you kind of scratch your head and say, how did that ever happen? And why
Yeah.
doesn't it happen more?
I know there was more of an adventurous spirit. I think it was before everything gets calculated. It's like baseball. Like, how do you take a pitcher out when they have a no-hitter going? Why are you doing that? You know what I'm saying? Like the metrics are almost messing everything up to a point where it's like there's no improv spontaneity. And obviously, you know that you're a jazz musician. I'm blown away by it.
Yeah, I don't know. It was I guess I was lucky enough to be around in that time. It was kind of a, golden age for that kind of music.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it had a really imprint on me, so
yeah.
yeah.
So what brought you to Kansas City?
I have a job with this guitar manufacturer as a sales rep. So I have a region I call on in the Midwest, and it's here. So that's what brought me here. Yeah.
What do you like the best about Kansas City?
Well, the music scene is just great here. I can't believe how cool it is.
Yeah.
And I get out in the clubs, and I'm able now to kind of sit in with local musicians. They kind of know me a little bit here in town, even though I don't have my own band. I'm not out playing in the clubs with my own thing. I get to play with other people here and there. So that's a really cool thing. And the musicians are welcoming, and really good players in town. And yeah, it's just amazing that on any given night you could have 10 to 15 places where you could go out and hear live jazz, which
Yeah.
I don't even know if like if Chicago has that kind of scene going. I don't know.
It's
But
weird, man. I hear that a lot. I mean, in big cities too. I mean, obviously not New York, but even in a place like LA and other
oh,
places, they're like, you know,
LA is a jazz. I mean, I don't know about other popular music, but it's there's nothing happening. I mean, it's just nothing. Yeah, so it's very, very cool. So I enjoyed that about Kansas City.
yeah. So in this journey of being a musician, what do you like the best about it? I mean, there's all these aspects. You record, you play live, promote, you do all these things, but what gets you out of bed every day? What do you look forward to the most?
Well, the thing that's amazing to me about about music is the place it takes me. I'll sit down, with a synthesizer, workstation, because a lot of the music on that album I composed here in my apartment on a synthesizer. So I'm doing all the parts. I'm doing all the keyboard parts, all the bass parts, in some cases drum parts and percussion parts. But it becomes this kind of world that I can kind of think into, where time it doesn't exist. It really becomes time out of mind, where I can just hours go by and I'm in this place, and there's a lot of energy in this place, and it's this creative process I go through. So to me, that's just what I love doing. I love it, and it's a great feeling. I love playing live as well, and I can find myself sometimes sinking into that same experience when you're playing live as well. But I guess it's kind of a selfish thing, but it's how it makes me feel that I
Yeah.
love the best. I mean, I do. Let's see how to say this. I don't think that I'm playing in a selfish way. However, I'm doing it because of really how it makes me feel, more than how I'm trying to make other people feel.
I
If
got
that
you.
makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I dig it. Yeah. So, the interesting thing about fusion is that, when you talk about jazz, you think about the ECM years, you think about Weather Report, you think about that whole trend. And I was interviewing someone the other day and they were talking about, you know, around the time that all of the fusion was coming out, there was a fear that acoustic jazz was going to go away. Maybe it was the fear when Bob Dylan went electric, we're going to not have the acoustic folk, which is such a weird, absurd notion because I don't think it's ever going to go away, but who knows? So, my question to you is that obviously it didn't affect acoustic jazz. It came back, it's evolving. How do you feel about the state of jazz in 2023?
Um, I think, first of all, just to go back to what you were saying about acoustic music, I mean, I play a lot of acoustic guitar on my album. I also use a lot of acoustic bass, upright bass. So, I'm using acoustic instruments all the time. So, again, I kind of look at it all as all one thing. I really don't, put, lines around things,
Yeah.
or put, music in a box. I just don't do that. And I think that, whatever suits a song, or suits a mood, is the instrument that I'm going to want to hear, I'm going to want to use. As far as the state of jazz, I don't know. It's kind of sad as far as if you look at the whole commercial world of music. I mean, my stuff is on Spotify. I've had many, many thousands, tens of thousands of downloads. My royalties are probably, I can buy a pizza, with the royalties I'm getting off of Spotify. So you can't make money with recorded music. So I think um, I think all musicians are just kind of left with live performance.
Yeah.
And so you record, to promote, live performance, or you record, because you just want to do it. But it's not a money-making enterprise. I think that Kansas City is a cool place because you have a jazz school, UMKC, and you got all these young kids coming out and they're playing jazz, and I see that in other cities where you have young people playing jazz. I'm not quite sure what happens to all these young people, because it's hard to make a living playing jazz, right? It's hard to make a living playing music, period. So I think it's a little scary sometimes, I think, when a kid, graduates after 4 years and he's got a major in, trumpet. Where's he going, with that? Where can you go? So it kind of concerns me that way. And there's other schools that, specialize in audio recording and production and, things of that nature. And they're charging you 60 grand a year, like a major university would, except, when you graduate from Harvard or Yale, you're going to have a pretty good chance of getting a job of some kind. But if you graduate from one of these other universities, I don't know about it. I don't think they're going to be able to place you in a quote as a producer or an assistant to a producer, or I think it's kind of it's high risk. It's a high risk endeavor. Anyway, take my hat off to the kids who are still playing jazz in schools, and I think that there are players coming up. I just don't think that commercially there's a lot of viable places where we can they can make a living.
Yeah.
So it's concerning.
So speaking of the kids, you've been around elder statesmen and veteran players throughout your life. What did you glean from them, whether from them dispensing verbal advice or you soaking in by osmosis? What did you glean from them that you in turn teach younger players that you get around?
Well, there's a couple of experiences. One I just had recently, but one was way back in Chicago when there was a club in the Playboy Club, if you remember that, where they had a little house band, and the house band was jazz trio, piano, bass, and drums, and they were hiring this rock and roll singer. It was a woman. She had a record out, and it was kind of a rock thing. So they wanted to add a guitar, to the house band so that it sounded a little more rocky. And so I was hired, and I got to play this gig. And so the house band guys heard me play and go, "Wow, you're a good player. Why don't you play with our set?" Because they would do an opening set, prior to this show with this girl. And I said, "Sure." And I went on stage and I said, "Do you have some sheet music?" No, there's no music. Just listen. And if you hear something you want to play, play. And I'm like, I don't know these tunes. I don't know these changes. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm up there, and it's like 1, 2, 3. What are we doing? And so, and they were very welcoming and open. It was just basically like, if you want to play something, play, And I've sat in at the Blue Room, a number of times here in town. And in fact, just, I guess 2 weeks ago with, kind of a house band situation. And then a couple of jazz giants actually came and sat in. Bobby Watson was there, and it was the same thing. It's like, okay, Scott, come on up and play. Okay, what are we playing? I don't know. 1, 2, 3. You're just there.
Yeah.
So you gotta. So I think that's one of the things that I think is amazing. But it's like a brotherhood, and it's like if you're in the brotherhood, you can figure it out and you find your place and play what fits. And so that to me is it's not like a lesson that was ever taught, but it was something that that I've grown to appreciate and enjoy.
Let me ask you this. If you could get into a time machine and see a dream jazz show, go back in time, where are you going? Who are you going to see live?
Has to be John Coltrane, has to be,
Yeah.
because you know, impact he had on jazz. And of course he had his different phases. And I know, you know, toward the end of his career, he was getting, you know, pretty out there. The music was really kind of experimental and atonal and all that kind of thing. So probably not, you know, that era, but you know, probably the quartet when it was at its, you know, its height, you know, Love Supreme era, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Up
So
in that.
yeah, for sure. So everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I think, you know, my playing is interesting because it's really a combination of things. I mean, when I get up on stage at the Blue Room with the Fender Stratocaster that has a whammy bar, you know, some of the older jazz guys look at me like, "Whoa, what is this guy doing here?" You know, because they're used to the big jazz boxes and the guys who sit down and kind of play that kind of thing. So I think that I'm kind of an anomaly in that way. That I mean I'm comfortable in all these worlds, but I do my thing in these worlds. I have my sound, I have my approach, and it's definitely more emotional. It has the kind of the elements of, you know, rock players like, you know, Jeff Beck, or the intensity of John McLaughlin. At the same time, though, I think I'm a little more melodic and maybe more sensitive to you know, maybe kind of more jazz I guess influences. So you know, the answer is I'm a combination. I'm a combination, and my writing, you know, my tunes. Again, I think if you listen to them, you'll hear all kinds of influences in there. You won't go, oh, you know, he's a this or he's a this. I'm hard to put in a box, I guess is what I'm saying. But you can hear, I mean, a lot of years of playing, because I've been playing since I was, you know, 6 and I'm 67. So that's a lot of years to play the guitar. So you can hear a lot of that in my playing, that I'm serious, I'm accomplished. You know, my technique is, you know, strong, and I've listened to a lot of different kind of music for a lot of years. So that's probably, if I was going to say anything about, well, you know, who is this guy? I'd say, you know, that's kind of who he is.
So if anyone wants to pick up Spheres, any of your previous work, learn more about you, anything about your world, where can they go?
Yeah, there's a couple places. Of course, you know, Spotify, YouTube. You can listen to the you know, to both albums and stuff previous to those albums. It's also available on SoundCloud, Bandcamp.com. I think those are all the kind of typical places where this stuff is. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. Scott, it's so great to run into you. It's great to, I mean, I love doing local, and this has been a very unexpected surprise. So thank you very much for opening up about the album, your world of music. I appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you out on the scene. Were you talking about the Monday night jam sessions at the Blue Room?
Played yeah, sometimes then, but sometimes Saturday night with the Jazz Disciples.
Right on. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to get in there and take a look. So hopefully I run into you. But Scott, this has been great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you so much, Joe. Okay.
You bet. And